And that's where it's not going to be a nuke, or it's not going to be something that's going to knock out the U.S.
Well, if you look at every empire, most empires are their own worst enemy.
And they're gonna fall within themselves.
Correct.
So, and do you feel it's the exact same two things? That's going to be, I wouldn't say immigration per se, because we're not going to get 30 million people.
Yeah.
Citizenship right away.
No, but I think the thing you have to realize is it's expanding. That's why I'm saying, like, are we to where Rome was when it fell? That was me on Next Level Soul podcast. If you came here from that appearance, welcome. Alex and I went deep on Rome and the Vatican for almost 2 hours to extend on this channel. But first, 4 corrections I owe you on the record. Historians in the audience will catch them, and I'd rather own up to them than have them here in the comments, and you could do it for me there. I'd rather do it here. So first, I told Alex that Tarquin the Proud, the last king of Rome, was assassinated by Brutus. He wasn't. Tarquin was overthrown and exiled in 509 BC after the rape of Lucretia. He died in exile years later, and most likely of natural causes. The expulsion of Tarquin is a founding myth of the Republic, but it was a political overthrow, not a murder. Now, I will add, there are some legends that maybe he was murdered, but it can only be proved that he was exiled. So second, when I talked about Josephus mentioning Jesus, I said it was one line, and that undersells the historical record a bit. Josephus has 2 references in the Antiquities of the Jews written around 93 AD. The longer Testimonium Flavium, which is several sentences and partly disputed for its Christian interpolation, and a separate undisputed mention of James, the brother of Jesus, called the Christ. Tacitus also mentions Christ in the Annals around 116 AD. The historical sourcing is stronger than what I made it sound like, so sorry about that. Third, I said the Council of Nicaea was in 326 or 331. It was actually 325. The first Council of Nicaea ran from May to August of 325 under Constantine. It produced the original Nicene Creed and standardized the date of Easter. Fourth, when I talked about Justinian sending Belisarius to reconquer Italy, I said Belisarius attacked Theodoric. He didn't. Theodoric the Great died in 526, and the Gothic War started in 535. Belisarius fought Theodoric's successors, Theodahad and Vitiges and Tortilla. The famous siege of Rome in 537 to 538 was Belisarius defending Rome, though I am of the opinion much of what he did actually destroyed it. With those on the record, here's the argument I didn't fully land on Next Level Soul. Rome didn't fall. The Western Roman political administration collapsed in 476, but the institutional architecture Rome built, the legal forms, the administrative units, and the religious hierarchy fused with state power and survived. It got inherited by the Roman Catholic Church. The Vatican is not a successor state to Rome. The Vatican is the same institution Rome was, wearing a robe instead of a toga. So let me show you exactly how that transition happened. So let's start with the timeline that no one is taught properly, because it matters for everything that comes after it. Rome wasn't one continuous thing. Rome was 3 completely different political systems, run back to back on the same patch of land, by people who kept the same name, even when they kept changing what Rome actually meant. Rome, the kingdom, runs from 753 BC to 509 AD. There's 7 traditional kings, founded mythologically by Romulus, ended by the overthrow of Tarquin the Proud 2.5 centuries later. Rome, the Republic, runs from 509 to 31. 2 consuls, 1-year terms, a senate, a careful architecture designed specifically to prevent any one man from holding kingly power. It lasts almost 500 years until Augustus. Rome, the Empire, runs from 31 BC to 476 AD in the west, and 31 BC to 1453 AD in the east. That's another half a millennium in the west, and a full additional millennium in the east. The Eastern Empire would have called itself Roman until the day Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453. So when we say Rome, which Rome are we talking about? Because the Republican mind that built America's founding generation is not the same Rome that produced Caligula. And the Rome that produced Caligula is not the same Rome that produced the Vatican. They share a name, They do not share a system. So here's me on Next Level Soul setting up that distinction. So then you have the Republic lasts from 509 BC to 31 BC. The final Republic character is Julius Caesar. So he's assassinated in 44, and the last kind of 10 years are his adopted son, Augustus, and his top general, Mark Antony, chasing his assassins around Europe, and then eventually chasing and killing each other is kind of the problem you have there. Mark Antony actually ends up committing suicide for fear of what Augustus will do to him once he eventually catches him. So Augustus actually becomes your first emperor. Now, he doesn't become emperor because he says hey, I'm the emperor, come worship me. He's brilliant. He's one of the smartest politicians in history, in my opinion. Caesar is a brilliant military tactician, but he made a lot of political blunders. As I mentioned earlier, the major one is he institutes some great laws in his first years as dictator. The first is the calendar we still use today. The Roman calendar was missing about 30 days, and every couple of years they'd add a month onto it to try and make things work out, so their seasons would be all over the place. So what Augustus ends up doing is he brings peace, and then he says, okay, I'm going to retire. Now you have to think the Roman Civil War that had ended here was about 100 years. So people are pretty beat up. They don't like the idea of war. They want peace. Now the first clip. Here's the thing the Vatican story depends on. Each of those three Romes inherited the institutional machinery of the previous one, then quietly modified it. The empire didn't replace the republic. It kept all the republican forms and emptied them of power. The Vatican is the next iteration of the same trick. It's the same trick, but with a different costume. This is the part most Western audiences miss because we live in a culture that separates church and state. Rome didn't. Rome couldn't even imagine the separation. To a Roman, religion was politics, and politics was religion. The state was a religious institution, and the religion was a state institution. The chief priest of Rome was called the Pontifex Maximus, literally the greatest bridge builder. That title was held by Roman political magistrates. Julius Caesar was a Pontifex Maximus before he was dictator. Augustus held it. Every Roman emperor from Augustus through Gratian also held it. It was a political office. When Christians refused to sacrifice to the emperor, Romans didn't read it as a religious dispute. They read it as a political act of rebellion. To refuse the sacrifice was to refuse the legitimacy of the state. That's why Christian persecution happened during weak periods of the empire. Nero, Decius, Diocletian. When emperors needed to demonstrate that political loyalty to the state still meant something. Now hold that mental model, religion and state as one institution, and watch what happens next. In 380, Theodosius issues the Edict of Thessalonica. Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman state. The state has now adopted the church. The church has now adopted the state. Within a few generations, when the Western Empire's political administration collapses in 476, the church doesn't have to rebuild any institutional architecture. The architecture is already there. The church inherits everything. The diocese, the Roman administrative unit, originally created by Diocletian. The vicar, the Roman regional administrator. The pontiff, the chief priest of Rome. The verbiage is Roman. The hierarchy is Roman. The legal forms are Roman. So here's me on Next Level Soul explaining that fusion. Roman religion is very different than we perceive religion. And because you would have the god Jupiter, but you could worship him as Jupiter, or Jupiter Optimus Maximus, like the king of the gods, or you could worship him in his form as the sun god, or you could worship Apollo or different appearances of Apollo. So you would worship different appearances of the deity. Now, most of us, we're going to church on Sunday, we're doing things like that. That's not how the Romans would have done it. They saw politics and religion as really the same thing. Like the state and the church were the same thing to them. It was no different. And that's actually part of, we'll get into that a bit, why the Roman Catholic Church forms the way it does. But to them, they would just go once a year on that feast day and offer sacrifices. And that temple to that god was likely locked other days of the year, and people wouldn't be in it. So religion for them, it's really interesting because they're a very religious people that's not very religious, if that makes sense. Do you get what I'm saying? They're not in the practice of it, but when they need to be. But there are different things they would look at, like bird signs. Our word inauguration comes from the word augury, or looking at bird signs to see, is this a good time to do this? Or they might cut out the entrails of an animal and see, based on how these intestines look, should we do this today?
Wow.
Now the second clip. So here's the reason this matters. When a state and its religion are the same institution, the religion can outlive the state. The state died in 476. The institution kept running. It just renamed itself. For 300 years, Christianity is tolerated in the then persecuted minority cult inside the empire. By 312, it's about 2% of the population. Then everything changes in a single afternoon. In October 312, the Battle of Milvian Bridge, just outside of Rome. Constantine, fighting his rival Maxentius for control of the Western Empire, has a vision. He sees the Chi Rho, the Greek letters Chi and Rho intertwined, the symbol of Christ. He hears the word in hoc signo vinces. In this sign, you will conquer. He paints the Chi Rho on his soldiers' shields. He wins the battle. In 313, the Edict of Milan makes Christianity legal across the empire. Constantine starts placing Christians in political appointments. So why does that matter? Because Roman politics was fundamentally a patronage system. If the emperor favors a religion, you convert to it for a job. The pace accelerates. By 325, just 13 years later, after Milvian Bridge, Constantine is calling the First Council of Nicaea, which standardizes doctrine of the calendar of feasts. In 380, Theodosius issues the Edict of Thessalonica. Christianity is now the official religion of the state, from legal in 313 to mandatory in 380. 67 years. Here's the thing nobody told you about Constantine. He was also a follower of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun cult, and the imagery of the two religions was already strikingly similar. Sun god, halo, December birthday. The Christianity Constantine adopted was a Christianity that fit comfortably inside the Roman religious political architecture, because it had been shaped to fit there over 3 centuries of cohabitation. By the time Constantine adopted it, becoming Christian wasn't really a rupture. It was a transition. Here's me on Next Level Soul walking through the turning point. So in 312, there's a battle called Milvian Bridge.
Okay.
This is kind of right after, so Diocletian is emperor in 284 to about 305, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And he splits up the empire. So the empire had a tendency to split up between East and West, but he actually officially splits it up because it's just too big for some one-person rule. So you have a senior emperor in the West and a senior emperor in the East and a junior emperor in the West and a junior emperor in the East. What would happen is now you have all these emperors, well, they start fighting each other for who's kind of the big cheese.
Of course.
You know, El Grande Formaggio. So they're kind of like fighting for who's in charge. And Constantine is fighting against another emperor who he actually basically, wants to be the big cheese, and he's kind of the final guy to actually reunite Rome before it breaks up again. And this Battle of Milvian Bridge, it's right outside of the city of Rome. He has this vision, and in the vision he sees under this sign you will conquer, and he sees the 2 Greek letters Chi and Rho. That's like the P and the X that we see. So he takes this, and it's a Christian symbol. So he has all his soldiers put it on their shield, and he wins the Battle of Milvian Bridge. So for him, after that, he likely starts practicing as a Christian.
I'm all in.
Yeah, but he doesn't actually become baptized until he is on his deathbed. Because during that time period, it was different too, because they saw baptism as removing your sins. Mm-hmm. And so, you might as well get them all in before you wipe them away, right?
Right.
So they would wait. A lot of times they were waiting to the end of their life to get baptized. So Christianity doesn't become the Roman religion, and only about 2% of the empire is Christian at this point in time. Mm-hmm. It just, for him, it ends up working out.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't.
Before this too, yeah. he had actually worshipped a god called Sol Invictus, or the immortal sun, which is, if you look up Sol Invictus, the symbology is very similar to like the idea of Christ. So for him, the change wasn't that dramatic to actually go from Sol Invictus to Jesus Christ. So now we get to 476, the standard story you were taught. Rome falls, barbarians at the gate, apocalypse. But here's what actually happened. The last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was a teenager. He was a figurehead being controlled by barbarian generals who'd already taken over the actual military. In September 476, the general Odoacer simply retired him, pensioned him off, put him in a comfortable estate in Italy, and gave him an annual stipend. The kid lived out his life in retirement. There was no apocalypse. There was no fire. there was a managerial transition. Odoacer declared himself king of Italy and sent the imperial regalia back to the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, and basically said there's no Western emperor anymore. The Western administration is done. But what didn't end? The diocese system that Diocletian had built 2 centuries earlier. That kept running. The administrative units, the legal traditions, the tax collection mechanisms all functioned. The road network, the Latin language, and critically, the church. The Catholic Church already had bishops in every major Roman city. The Pope in Rome was already operating under Roman administrative norms. When the political administration walked out, the church administration was already in place to fill the void. Within decades, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, is fundamentally the most powerful office in Western Europe. Not because he conquered anything, because he was the last functional Roman administrator left standing. The Vatican is what happened when Rome's political class evaporated, and the religious class took over the empty offices. Same building, same paperwork, different uniform. So here's me on Next Level Soul on that institutional handoff. The 4th clip. Well, it was how Diocletian divided up the empire. They had these different areas called dioceses. The man in charge of a diocese was called a vicar.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we get the word from. If you look at the word pontiff that we use for the Pope, the chief priest of Rome was the Pontifex Maximus. So it's just what ends up happening is, and once again, this is my interpretation of it, is since there's no like political and spiritual separation, even though the empire falls, the church still exists. They're going to use the same verbiage. They're going to use the same structure because that's how they did things. It's how the church was established.
And they're using the resources that were left behind, I guess, as far as like there was some money left there, obviously, because
So I don't know how I do know that, as you said, the Catholic Church has like so much of like history and things. I don't know how they end up getting it, honestly.
When was the St. Peter's Basilica
I don't know.
built?
I don't know offhand.
Okay, yeah, because I mean,
I've been there a couple times, but I don't know.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I've
actually been in the catacombs, and I've seen.
Me too.
Yeah, I've seen the bones.
Yeah, I saw Peter's. Oh, that was great, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I turned the corner. I'm like, what's that room? Like, no pictures. I'm
it's
like,
wild under there, though, man. Like all the skeletons and stuff. It's wild.
Yeah, I mean, you just see like, oh, there's a Pope from 1300.
Yeah.
Like it's just insane.
Yeah.
The catacombs is pretty, but when I turned and I saw St. Peter, I was like, what is it? Just the room, everything was just a different vibe. That place is very interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know as much about the early history. Like I do, like as I said, I know where the verbiage comes from. The verbiage comes from like, hey, these were words that Diocletian used when he reorganized the empire.
Mm-hmm.
And as it's only about 20 years after that when Christianity through Constantine comes into Rome is really like, as I mentioned, it'd been there, but like actually comes to somewhat of power. So they're going to use the same words. This is why I keep saying that institutions outlive empires. The Roman political system died in the 5th century. The Roman institutional system is still running. It just has different management. And here's why this matters now. Because the same mechanism is operating in America right now. Imperial political administrations come and go. Presidents have 4-year terms, or 8-year terms if they're lucky. Congresses turn over every 2 years. Every election season, Americans are encouraged to believe that their political vote will fundamentally change how the country operates. But the Federal Reserve doesn't change with elections. The FBI doesn't change with elections. The CIA, the NSA, the State Department, the Defense Department's relationship with its contractors. These institutions outlive every administration. They have their own internal cultures, their own succession mechanisms, their own permanent funding streams. They're already trained to be the institution that survives when the political layer above them turns over. That's the Roman pattern in real time. The political class is the visible Rome. The administrative state is the invisible Rome. When the political Rome eventually collapses, and it will, because every political Rome eventually collapses, the institutional Rome will inherit everything. Same buildings, same offices, different uniforms. The question isn't whether America's current political system will survive. The question is who inherits it when it doesn't. This was the Vatican's role for 500 years after the Western Empire's collapse. They were the institution that was already there, already trained, already authorized when the political layer above them disappeared. Find the institutions in 2026 that look most like the late Roman bureaucracy. Permanent, opaque, self-perpetuating, deeply uninterested in elections. And you're looking at the next inheritors. Here's me on Next Level Soul landing the modern parallel.
Well, we are essentially a Roman Empire.
Exactly.
In many ways.
Right. So if we kill our currency, just like it did in Rome, well, there is no empire anymore. And I think that's what you have to really consider is we're telling people don't use our dollars. We're running the cash register up like there's no tomorrow. Eventually, there's kind of no off-ramp.
The music's going to stop.
The music stops playing soon.
Yeah.
And the thing you have to consider is, okay, if we're going to fix that, it's still going to be bumpy because our dollar's not based on anything. So if you try to put it back on something, well, we're so far over our skis, how do you do that? So
you can't put it in gold.
You can't put it back in the box. That's the problem. If you put it on a gold standard, well, then
it's $45,000 ounce gold.
Right. Because the problem you would have then as well is we would also have to change like tariffs and industry and stuff like that because we would have to bring production back here at the same time that we changed monetary policy. Otherwise, we're screwed. Now the fifth clip. If you came here from Next Level Soul, thanks for following me over here. Alex runs one of the most thoughtful pattern recognition shows on the internet. And that 2-hour conversation only scratched the surface. If you want the deeper Rome arguments, the Marian reforms that broke military loyalty, the 3rd century collapse, the monetary debasement story, that's what this channel does every Monday. Subscribe and you'll get a different piece of the Roman pattern each week. If you want the American version of this argument, the 1913 architecture, the Federal Reserve, the institutional continuity story applied to the United States, well, that's on my other channel, Hidden Forces in History, and it's linked below. The breakout video on this channel that ties this all together is Are We the Fade Right Now? And it's linked below. If you watched nothing else of mine, watch that one. It's my full thesis. Rome is falling right now. You're just watching the replay. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. This has been the Roman Pattern. I'll see you Monday.